Hi everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Tina, and I'm the Capability Building Coordinator for Connecting Up and TechSoup New Zealand. Connecting Up is a part of the Info Exchange Group. Info Exchange is a not-for-profit social enterprise that has delivered technology for social justice for over 25 years. With over 100 staff across Australia and New Zealand, we tackle the biggest social challenges through the smart and creative use of technology. I'd like to welcome you all to the webinar Monitoring and Evaluation's Role in Donor Engagement, Retention and Reporting and How to Get Started, which will be presented by Greg Simmons from Blackboard and Joe Garner from Strategic Grants. We'll start with a little bit of housekeeping. All lines are muted, so if you have any technical issues, please type it into the questions box on your webinar panel and I'll be able to assist you through there. If you have any questions during the session, please also type it into the questions box and Greg and Joe will answer them in the Q&A section at the end of the webinar. Please note that your comments and questions will not appear to the entire group. If you are on a Wi-Fi connection and have multiple programs open, this can sometimes affect the quality of the audio and video of the webinar. If possible, please close all other programs to help you have the best experience. Please note that the webinar is being recorded and a link to the recording and the slides will be sent to you shortly after the webinar ends. Before we start, I'd also like to remind you that there will be a short survey at the end of the webinar. We'd appreciate it if you took a few minutes to provide us with some feedback. That's all from me for now. I'll pass it over to Greg and Joe to get things started. Thanks, Greg. Thanks, Joe.
Thanks, Tina. First of all, thanks for the opportunity to present today. It's appreciated. And like I have to say, I'm super excited to be presenting on this topic with Joe. And I guess on the theme of just getting started, let's just get started. So I just want to reflect, back in February, I read an article that was published through Pro Bono Australia. It talked about not-for-profits struggling to measure impact. And I guess some of the key things it talked about was charities needing greater funding support to measure outcomes, lacking resources, the need for encouraging organisations to develop their own outcomes measurement framework, acknowledging it as a big task, but also, as an opportunity for organisations to set the agenda. Then it talked a lot about the need for funders to come to the table and recognise the cost and effort associated with outcomes measurement. So as you do, I saw this and thought, well, I'm going to share this on LinkedIn. And so I wrote a bit of a post, which is basically that I reckon I've heard the same comments every year for the last 6 years about, about this difficulty of actually just getting started. But I sort of acknowledge that, look, there are funders who will fund this, and are funders, both government and philanthropic, who will support it. And really that, I guess from a Blackboard perspective, we can support that through built for purpose outcomes measurement tools. So I guess our context in that, just as a little bit of background to introduce Blackboard. So what we do is we help organisations improve their fundraising outcomes through fundraising CRM. So we've been doing that for 40 years and we have about 40,000 customers worldwide and about 5,000 of those in Australia, New Zealand and Asia. But over the 6 years, we've really seen, we started about 6 years ago and started thinking about this whole area of outcomes and the importance of that for traditional donors, for philanthropic funders, the broad perspective. So over the last 6 years, we've been working with customers who are doing some fantastic stuff around monitoring evaluation using systems to support that. I also then went straight and made a comment and actually called out Joe Garner, who's obviously joining on this webinar today in Strategic Grants. Known of Joe and the team for a long time, they do an amazing job in terms of, not only helping charities identify grants, but also helping them be more successful in securing grants. But also Joe and the team, actually helping many joint customers actually with actually monitoring and evaluation. So they actually have an ability to actually go in and help organizations build their frameworks and apply evaluation. So I called out to Joe to comment. So Joe responded, performance management evaluation does not need to be complex. and provided a blog. Then there was a bit of commentary around some skepticism, and the skepticism was around I guess the value that organisations and boards saw in the value of impact measurement. And they even made, and there was even one comment shared, there is not much evidence that impact measurement equals funding. So I guess, and bringing it back to the topic in hand, so it's a nice introduction, I guess, in that little journey, that little story of about actually bringing it back to monitoring evaluation's role in donor engagement, retention, reporting. We think it's really key, and we also think it brings a lot of benefit. So from an agenda perspective, just to feed on that, what we wanted to do today, myself and Joe, is actually give you a bit of an understanding of the terminology, and then I'm going to hand over to Joe, who will really go through the core of this presentation. Why monitor and evaluate, how to get ready, identifying output versus outcomes, why collect data. And then I'm going to pick up again and present a little case study of one of our customers, the data collection methods they've used and what the results have been in terms of what they've seen in working with it. And then I'm going to close off by actually giving you some examples of how to use data for donor engagement. Some really neat little examples that I think will be valuable. So that's the plan of attack. So monitoring evaluation. So let's just talk through this. So let's be really clear. Monitoring and evaluation allows those involved in programs to learn from experience, to achieve better results, and to be accountable, which is a really important thing. Monitoring is a systematic and routine collection of information from projects and programs. Monitoring allows results, processes, and experiences to be documented and used as a basis to steer decision-making and learning processes. Monitoring is checking progress against plans. The data acquired through monitoring is then used for evaluation. Evaluation is assessing as systematically and objectively as possible a completed project or partially completed project. Evaluations appraise data and information that inform strategic decisions, improving the project or program in the future. It uses the data and insights from monitoring to look at the whole completed picture. A good evaluation will produce objective information on how well and to what degree you accomplish your organisational goals, as well as your commitments to the funder. And isn't that important? Good evaluation sheds light on the merit, worth, and significance of your programs and projects. Evaluation allows you to know and understand to improve and affect change. The primary purpose, in addition to gaining insight into prior or existing initiatives, is to enable reflection and assist in the identification of future change and best practice. So that's sort of really, very clearly outlining those things. But I think, more than that, and Joe will sort of pick up these points and sort of develop them. It's when you look at it and break it down simply, it allows work to be more effective. We all have limited time, money, resources in this sector, so we have to do a lot with little often. So, why shouldn't we embrace monitoring and evaluation to help with that very issue? If we do that, it's going to provide some great information to share with our stakeholders, whoever they be, from board, to our traditional donors, to our funders, as we talked about. And again, I'll give some examples at the end. But also it became, the exciting part about it is it helps just a learning organization, an evolving organization that's dynamic. It keeps the team and leadership inspired. So there's so much that relates to this. When we think about this, we apply a model. So when I'm talking about this with organisations we're working with, and Joe, if I'll just go to the next slide. We have a particular model. We like to frame this, the Human Services Maturity Model. Now, and I sort of guess throw the challenge out to you to think about where you are in your own organisation in terms of this model. So I'm on the board of Down Syndrome New South Wales. I'm a fortunate position to have a daughter with Down syndrome. She's 25 in open employment, doing pretty well, which is cool. and I've been sort of involved in not-for-profit boards since she was about 6 months old. So that really gives me good context. And when I think about the work we do, our Down syndrome New South Wales, traditional advocacy-based organisation, does great things for people with Down syndrome, but a lot of it in the past has been pen and paper. So the first step is if we can go from pen and paper just to use a systematic way to actually count our outputs more effectively, all of a sudden we're becoming more efficient and we're actually making sure we're doing our compliance-driven reporting more effectively. So that's a great starting point. But if we can then start to measure outcomes, start to think about the questions we're asking and what the information is we're gathering, we can start to get that retrospective view of effectiveness. So we can start to do some reporting. But I guess the next iteration is that we can then start to reflect that information back to our staff, for our frontline workers. We can start to actually be more effective in our service delivery. We can actually start to work out what's working and what can be improved. Our customers often say, putting a spotlight, using data as a spotlight, not a sledgehammer. So it's starting to help us improve the programs. And then really the highest performing of our customers are actually thinking more than just within their own four walls. They're thinking about sector-wide collaboration. How do we share data models, frameworks, validated tools, and actually cross boundaries into other organizations or agencies and start to share that data? So that's sort of it, getting towards the more high performing. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Jo, who will then, as I say, really develop some of these things and take it from here. So over to you, Jo.
Thanks so much, Greg. Good morning, everybody. Great to be here with you today. So as Greg has already outlined, strategic grants' role in the monitoring and evaluation framework development is really just that. As we know, those of us who are actively seeking funds from philanthropic donors of any type, especially at the major donor level or from government, it's all now about outcome and impact reporting. So the need to implement or design and implement and then manage a robust monitoring and evaluation framework is really critical to ensuring continued donor engagement and funding success. So, as Greg's already defined, the purpose of your monitoring and evaluation is to systematically collect information about program activities and objectives, monitor the progress, and to report and communicate results to your network members, partners, stakeholders, and community of funders, etc. The evaluation results and learnings can then be integrated back into your programs, which of course is an action research learning model to improve performance and also help to demonstrate the need for future programs. By doing this, by applying that knowledge that you're learning constantly from the difference that your work is actually bringing to the community, that's the real clincher for engaging your donors in sustained giving and new giving. So good evaluation practice helps you with project planning, understanding the effect your program has had on the people participating, understanding how the process of implementing your program might have influenced the outcome, and how it can be done better next time. So what's important to remember is that it doesn't have to be a difficult, overly academic approach, but you do need some kind of evaluation plan in place. It can take place at different times during a project for different purposes, as we can see from the diagram that you're currently looking at. And by monitoring and by monitoring and collecting the data through every step of this cycle, you're going to be really sure that your project is funder ready and that we're in the best position to engage our donors. So donors invest in organisations that they have confidence in. They're confident in those who can really clearly demonstrate what their capabilities and competencies are. And therefore, we've got to be able to answer these questions. What's the track record of your organisation? So for those of you who may be familiar with applying for funding to perpetual trustees, for example, have some really tricky questions in the front end of the application form around what your organisation efficiencies are and what your organisation effectiveness KPIs are. And furthermore, how are you performing against them? So they want to know that you do have the capability to actually administer the funds and deliver the project that you say in the way that you say you're going to. Then importantly, how do you actually know there's a need for your work? So many applications that we look at have very fluffy, if you like, commentary around a need that you're actually filling. So we need to make sure that we've got demonstrable evidence there. How do you know your suggested approach is actually going to work, and what difference is it going to make? Did we do what we said we'd do? To what extent did it make a difference, and how do we know that? So charities, of course, work towards creating change for the issues important to their mission, and evaluation helps us to identify important concerns and issues and to plan and implement strategies to mitigate the concerns and solve the problems. Donors give grants and donations because they want to invest in achieving a particular social initiative or policy. Evaluation is going to help you present the evidence that your initiatives work and that they are a good investment now and into the future. So we need to be able to answer the questions on this slide. What will happen? What does a good evaluation plan look like? Where does it go in a proposal? Who can do it? How much does it cost? And what are you supposed to do with the results? So now we'll get into looking at the basic tools to help you start planning and developing the practice of monitoring evaluation as a core part of your programs. And as with good strategies, we're going to focus on the who, what, when, where, why, and how of evaluation. Now, this might be a familiar model to some of you, a very simple sample of a program logic model developed by the W.K. Kellogg Foundation, who call it a visual way to present and share your understanding of the relationship among the resources you have to operate your program, the activities you plan, and the changes or results you hope to achieve. Maybe you've already got one of these in place. If not, it's a great place for you to start in terms of takeaways from this session today. These models are also sometimes referred to as a theory of change. And making use of this theory of change is a really great visual tool that will help you at every stage with planning, forward thinking, assessing the meaningfulness of the data, and meeting your benchmarks of success. So for our evaluations, this program logic is the hypothesis we are testing. If this and this occurs in these circumstances for this population, we arrive at the end result. And from our program logic then stems our indicators of success. It's also really important that your theory of change contains some theory, a literature review of theoretical underpinnings of the change you're aiming to produce is going to turn up plenty of academic literature generally that provides insight into the type of intervention you're looking at, what's been done before, some indicators of success, and even benchmarking data you can use eventually to compare your data to. So looking at the example here, our inputs are all of the resources that we need to make the program happen. So that's going to be human, financial, etc. Your activities, your actual strategies that you're going to have to implement to arrive at the outputs. The outputs are generally quantifiable. They are the number of occasions of service delivery or program delivery numbers, the number of people that attended, etc. The outcomes then are the changes that are going to occur because of your inputs, activities, and outputs. So what are the intended benefits to the participants? And then, of course, our impact, looking into our further definitions, is the longer term change that's going to happen or has there been a systematic change? So has our intervention actually changed the way maybe just our organisation does something, or can we apply it to a wider sector learning? And if we can demonstrate that, then we have demonstrated an impact. So with this literature and wider needs analysis, we can then begin to make assumptions behind why we think outcomes will occur and how much they're going to occur. So let's apply the logic model to a fictitious charity, St. Joseph's, who provides social welfare services directed at reducing homelessness. So the project that St. Joseph's wants to run is a collaborative one with a health service organisation. And what the two of them are planning to do is establish a harm reduction model to help homeless addicts by treating the critical needs of each individual. And they're going to do this by providing short-term supported accommodation, which has got an inbuilt rehab program. And then they're going to have counselling staff on site to work together with the residents to also assist them with their accommodation options and transitioning out into independent living. So we're making an assumption, which of course is going to be based on a fairly hefty needs analysis and other literature review. So the assumption in this case is a harm reduction focus on addiction treatment paired with supported accommodation is going to lead to a reduction in homelessness. So here you can see that the resources and inputs that we've defined are the funding requirements, the different staff members that we need, the in-kind support that we're getting from our collaborative organisation and any others. We might have land or a building or something donated to us from government or another provider, etc. The activities might include things like confirming lease agreements, putting our memorandum of understanding in place with our referral partners and establishing our referral pathway models. We might have to do some, mundane stuff like purchase furniture and equipment and, of course, employ people. So what might some output examples look like? We're going to have 8 new furnished accommodation units with communal areas. There's going to be some treatment rooms, and we're going to be able to treat 32 clients and house them each year. What the outcomes are going to be, we're going to have improved accommodation opportunities, so there is a change. We're going to have a caseworker leading the work to decrease substance use. We're going to have better health outcomes for residents, and we'll have an improvement in wellbeing as a result of the short-term accommodation. Then what would the likely impact look like? A decreased number of presentations to emergency departments, decreased homelessness, and an increased quality of life for clients and their families. So they're all really big impacts, and obviously to be able to measure those and demonstrate that we're actually delivering these, we need to have very clear, concise evaluation questions and evaluation tools in place. So the theory of change or logic model is one of the key foundations of your evaluation plan. So too are the evaluation questions, the indicators that you're using and the definitions of program success, and how you're going to collect the data. So what do those data collection tools look like? Let's get into it then with your key evaluation questions. So you need to start by asking really clear questions about a project's processes and outcomes, about implementation, about sustaining achievements, and about the outcomes and how you will know when you've achieved them. Key evaluation questions are the high-level questions that an evaluation is designed to answer, and they generally inquire about the program's efficiency, effectiveness, outcomes, and impact. Having an agreed set of key evaluation questions makes it much easier to determine the next steps, what data to collect, how to analyse the data, and how to report your results. They're going to be developed alongside the goals, objectives, and activities of your projects. And it's best if they're really focused and specific. So using our St. Joseph's example, our assumption is that a harm reduction focus on critical health and housing needs will lead to long-term permanent housing. So the evaluation questions therefore need to be forward-facing and action-orientated. What will it take to genuinely address the critical health and accommodation needs of our clients, which lead to those long-term changes of providing permanent housing and their ability to stay homed? In order to come up with these questions, you're going to need to review with stakeholders, partners, beneficiaries, etc., why you need to do the evaluation and how the results will be used and by whom. Brainstorming is a great way to come up with a list of questions about the specific component or activity that you actually want to evaluate. And then you need to classify your questions in different areas. So there are going to be process questions, which are primarily concerned with the implementation or actual process of delivering. And then there are going to be outcome questions, which are concerned with the effects of the program delivery on the target population. So if we do this, this is how many people are going to participate. This is how many people will get the help they need. This is how many will have better sustained housing results at the end of the program. It's easier to classify key evaluation questions if you group the questions by themes, so operations, behaviours, health, etc. And that way, when you're collecting the data, you can group the data into those key themes and report back on those themes. And then the last step, of course, involves prioritising those evaluation questions depending on the relevance of them to the purpose of the evaluation and the available resources you have to actually do the surveying and to collate and analyse all of the data. So it's a good idea to start by asking yourself these things. What's the benefit of answering your evaluation question? Who's it going to help and how? How will you go about answering the question? What type of information will you need to gather to answer the question? How long is it going to take you to get the answer? And questions that start with "to what extent" are a really great way to get started. So looking at the example here, to what extent does having their health and accommodation needs met help clients sustain long-term housing? The benefits of answering this question are many. For the organisation and partners, you're learning from asking this question, what constitutes best practice in creating long-term permanent housing outcomes? And then other benefits are, if you can prove you're creating better outcomes with this model, that provides a basis on which to seek further funding. And it's also going to mean that you can forward plan future programs and projects from a really strong evidence base, understanding what's working. Meaning that you've got your own internal data that you can then present to funders in the future. And you're able to monitor, continually monitor that program internally, tweak it as you're going, and address any barriers to reach the intended outcomes moving forward. So it's going to take you a few iterations to come up with that final list of key evaluation questions. You need to draft it, test it, redraft it, test it again until you've got a really clear list and you're getting really great sample data. They're going to tell you the kinds of data that it's important to capture. So you'll know with that test list of questions that you're running, if there's still missing information, you might need to add some more questions in or rephrase the questions to get the right information that you're looking at. So now we'll have a look at the methods of data collection. It's important to define and measure progress towards the goals and objectives of the program being evaluated. And to do this, review those evaluation questions, as I said, think about what success looks like, and then develop your indicators, which you can use to gather information to measure the results. So remember, your indicators are specific. They're observable and measurable tools or metrics to help you answer your research questions. Literature reviews, for example, run from similar projects with similar populations, may highlight already available indicators that can be adapted and applied to your evaluation. And this is where I would recommend that you really do collaborate with other organisations in your service area and share evaluation questions and evaluation tools and methods. It's a really great way for you to collaborate. You'll need to determine whether those existing indicators will suffice in the case of your project or whether new, more specific ones need to be adapted or developed. So after selecting the indicators and metrics you'll use to answer the questions, you next need to consider how to find and collect the data. So the sources of data collection, so the type of data you're collecting, whether it's secondary or primary, need to answer evaluation questions, and that depends entirely on the evaluation type, the intervention and the resources available. So you can collect data in an oral way, a written way, a visual way, numeric, symbolic, digital, etc. And deciding on those data sources will depend not only on your questions, but on the context of the evaluation itself. So it can be really expensive and time consuming. So you need to make sure that the resources and timelines have been taken into consideration, and make sure that you factor in evaluation costs to any project budgeting that you're doing, particularly if you're applying for funding for it. So more and more funders are happy to see evaluation costs in a program delivery plan and budget. Looking at the quality and quantity, evaluation should always strive for a high quality of data, of course, which emerges from thoroughly planned data gathering methods. And those methods are going to collect the right information from the right groups of people at the right time, and that which strive to be objective rather than seeking information to confirm your hypothesis. Evaluations can result in quite a bit of data and data sources. In fact, there's going to be a lot of data, and it's an issue, I know, and a challenge with many organisations that they have these data capture tools in place and they have so much data, but they haven't had the resource to actually collate and analyse and report it in a meaningful way. So you really do need to consider how much is going to be collected. Only, I would suggest, collect as much as you can actually analyse and report in a meaningful and relevant way. It's no use having the data sitting there if you're not going to use it. So keep in mind also the ethical considerations for data collection, such as confidentiality, privacy, as well as cultural and personal preferences. Here we can see we've defined our key evaluation questions and developed the following indicators that give evidence as the link between substance misuse with the ability to maintain housing. So the key evaluation question we've come up with is, to what extent does having their health and accommodation needs accommodation needs met help clients sustain long-term housing? The indicators we've come up with: a clinical assessment of substance use minimisation at 1 month after entry into the program, that there's a percentage difference in self-reported reduction in substance use in the first month, there's competence and improvement in living skills pre and post entry, there's improvements in levels of knowledge and confidence in managing health needs. There are 3 time point measures on quality of life and wellbeing through a survey tool. And then there's a 5-week post-exit follow-up on their housing status. So the sources of data collection that we might use here are the clinical nurse and social worker case reports, the clients actually reporting, self-reporting, and client pre and post surveys. Now let's look at what other data collection tools that we might want to consider. So as we've already said, good evaluation helps you move well beyond the basic outputs approach, just counting the numbers of people who are participating. It actually helps us understand how it counts, so the effect that it's had on the people participating. And it can use either quantitative or qualitative measures. So remember, the qualitative is the measure of human experience. and a good evaluation really should include both. So the data collection methods you select will be determined partly by the indicators you've set, the type of data you want to collect, and the question you're seeking to answer. A number of other considerations will influence your data collection methods, like the needs of the target group, the timing, the access to tools, etc. So once you have an idea of what you want to evaluate and develop the indicators you will measure, you'll need to put together the tools you can apply to reach your chosen indicators. They can be varied, broad, tried and tested, or context specific. And you can either adopt or adapt tools off the shelf or create new ones. Either way poses challenges. Tools that have been developed for one evaluation may not prove suitable for another, at least not without careful modification. For example, survey questions designed to measure well-being with adults certainly might not be suitable to measure children's experience and understanding of what actually well-being even means. So at the same time though, creating new tools requires expertise in measurement and instrument design. So just make sure that you're exploring all of the different options available to you and just agreeing on this, the data collection tools that are going to work within your timeframes and resourcing. So going back to our logic model, it's always good when we are using evaluation to report back to funders, for example, to check what any funder requirements have been, and making sure that we are telling them what they have specified that they want to know. And of course, our key evaluation questions should have been designed to include any of those specifications. So here we can see that we've got a little bit more data in our logic model, plus we're bringing the use of graphs in. And I'm sure that the examples that Greg's got have got some really good illustrative tools that further allow you to engage with your donors through the impact reporting. So, as I said, you've probably collected a lot of data and it's going to take a lot of time to go through it all. So just make sure that you're not ignoring anything and that you're not being, you've got to be objective. So if your data says something where you're not getting a clear answer, for example, it was okay, I guess, don't interpret that as 100% satisfaction with your program. Report the nuance and investigate then the I guess further so that you can really understand what's going on. And if you're not getting the results that you thought you were going to get, then that's not a bad result. And you've got to remember that. It means you're learning and you need to refine things. That's a positive outcome. So after you've drawn conclusions from the data, you're going to need to report the results. You've got to let your funders, managers and staff know about the findings and whether there's a broader issue that needs to be considered. And of course, then you can share those results through publications and presentations, in summary sheets, photo stories, in your annual reports. Social media is a great one, local media. And remember that the findings are going to be of interest to your beneficiaries and other stakeholders. So just in summary then, before I hand over to Greg, evaluation planning starts at the beginning of program design and should involve all of your relevant stakeholders. The evaluation plan is an integral part of the project proposal, and it outlines how you're going to know the program has made a positive change in the community in which you operate, whether it be an environmental cause, animal welfare, the arts, health or social services. With that, I'm going to hand back over to Greg now to take you through some examples. Thanks, Greg.
Thank you, Jo. So yeah, I'm going to actually now use a bit of a case study approach to actually build on particularly those, you know, using the results in donor engagement. So, and actually exploring some of the outcomes to doing that. Also, actually, just wanted to comment, I love the concept Jo shared in terms of sharing questions to encourage collaboration. I think that's a great way. You know, often collaboration can be challenging. So, I thought that was a great way of doing that. So look, one of our customers, Cystic Fibrosis WA, I guess faced that challenge where they had data, but it was in different repositories. They had gaps in their data, and they were facing some challenges around their funding, to be frank. So they were on a 3-year funding cycle, and it was some questions were being asked within the organisation. So they're increasingly they were facing some challenges around the state government in WA's moving towards outcomes-based funding models. There was uncertainty around the impact of the NDIS, and also economically some challenges in the WA economy, which actually created some doubt and some really thinking around sustainability. Also, in trying to, I guess, manipulate data in a way that they could get ready to report to their stakeholders was really time consuming. So, that was becoming an increasingly an issue. And also, I guess, as we see many times, often an organisation will take up a grant. They might then develop a program. They lose that grant funding. So things can really develop. So often, structurally and strategically, that can impact, where we're going as an organisation. So really what they wanted to do was actually understand and I guess apply some of the thinking that we've talked about today. And really around that accountability, transparency, and actually having an audit trail in terms of how they were actually collecting their data. So they were looking for a way to actually do that, but also put the data capture in the hands of their home care workers and their other case workers. And the key there is actually if they're mobile. So how could we actually enter the information when we're mobile in a way that actually gives the benefit back to the frontline worker, but still capturing in a way that it was structured to meet their goals around the outcomes-based reporting. So that was their challenge. So, and next slide, Joe. So this is how they went about doing it. And it is using a product called Apricot. Now, as Connecting Up members, you have access to discounted prices on Apricot, and this is the tool that Blackboard provides to support the work and actually really to operationalize the ongoing monitoring and evaluation. So really what Joe shared with you is how to get started in thinking about the questions, the tools, the surveys, what data we want to capture. But the challenge is if we're just going to do that in an Excel spreadsheet and we end up doing point-in-time evaluations rather than actually having it as part of our everyday, which really then drives those behavioural changes that we're looking for. So in this case, we've got a view of a client, Abigail. We're collecting specific demographics that we want to report against. And they're really completely flexible about what demographics we want to capture. But as you'll notice here, there's like a folder. And I guess think of, traditionally, if we're a paper-based system and we're going to visit a client, we've got our manila folder and we've got our client demographic detail. We might have an intake form or a program enrollment. We might have a service plan. We have some services that we provided, etc. So it's sort of a similar model to that. But you'll notice here that this is really an ability to capture all the different data capture points within one place and all showing up against the client record. So this could be both internal forms, an intake form that you've got internally with your own organisation, but also to Joe's point, it could include validated tools you might use. And one example of that is the Arizona Self-Sufficiency Matrix Assessment. Now that's a tool that is quite commonly used amongst our customers in Australia. It's taking a validated tool that's internationally recognised, but applying it in a manner that works within our own country. So next slide, Joe. So here's the example of what that looks like within the system. So here we've got the ability to effectively take a survey, and here's the secret sauce. What we're doing here is capturing that change over time. So, you know, in applying our self-sufficiency matrix, we actually have a baseline. We've got 3, 6, 9 month follow-ups and follow-up on exit. We can select the relevant domains that we're taking. And next slide, Joe. Then, and against each of those domains, it'll actually allow us to select the relevant answers. Now, this could be a Likert scale, it can be radio buttons, really whatever you like. Whatever is actually logical to your frontline workers to make that data entry really easy and relevant. So the other key thing is that then if we've got a validated tool, we obviously need to bring in rating and scoring. So what we're doing here is based on the answers to the relevant questions, we're actually creating a score. And then that can be used to actually look at that change over time. Importantly, is the auditability of this. So obviously the type of information and work we're doing can be quite sensitive in terms of privacy, consent, etc. So really important to be able to do a full auditability on that. So really key there. And next slide, Joe. What this all rolls up to, importantly, is that we've done our work. We've actually thought about the questions and the work we need to do, what the data is we need to capture. We have a system in place now to start capturing that consistently across all our work and our programs. What's the outcome to that? Well, two key things. One, you know, I talk to a lot of people, and just to be able to produce a report for your annual report to say, here's by program the number of deduplicated participants or families or referrals or whatever it is we're working with in one report, wouldn't that be fabulous? So that's the type of thing that we're able to deliver through having this structured approach. Importantly though, from a monitoring evaluation perspective, is also now showing, here's a little graph that shows, and this could be, depending on my user access, I could be looking at an individual and seeing their score change over time for Abigail, for instance. If I'm a caseworker, I could be logging in and seeing for my cohort what the change over time for my cohort is. If I'm at a manager level, I can see over the group of caseworkers I'm working, I actually manage what their score is for their cohort. And at executive level, I can see a whole view of the organization. So really, there's an ability to actually aggregate data for reporting. Okay, so the results. So basically, this allowed a paradigm shift within cystic fibrosis WA. So it really provided insight based on outcomes, which was important. And they directly attributed to be actually one of the outcomes and actually it was a really interesting story in that they actually shared the journey with their funder. So prior to actually even implementing the system, they actually sat down with their funder and said, this is what they were intending to do. And they actually got input from their funder into the questions, but also made sure that they reflected to their funder what were the important questions they felt they should be asking and collecting data on. So it had an immediate impact in terms of being able to get a 5-year contract, significant reduction in admin time, travel expenses, a range of things, and really then being able to do that, improve stakeholder engagement through the ability to report and to aggregate their information. And exciting for them, they also were the winner of 2016 Telstra Business Awards, which was really cool. A really cool fact they shared with us when we were actually talking to them is the fact that 6 months after they actually had started doing their reporting back to their funder realised they're actually contributing even further than what they thought in terms of the outcomes they were achieving. And actually, they actually negotiated a contract uplift as a result of being able to share additional information and impact with their funder, which was pretty cool for them. So here's a few examples of how you can use. So as a sector, we're really, really good at sharing impactful stories, which is still absolutely critical. But if we can back up our impactful stories with data, then we can really make significant change. Then we can really, you know, rock this world in terms of the change we can make. I'd love to, and I'm really excited to share with you. There's a video which we can share the links to. It's from an organization called Roka in the US. And it tells a story about, they're relentless. They work with kids in gangs in Chicago and around that area, and kids who are coming out of jail, and they're relentless. They just do not give up on them. So it's basically giving them vocational pathways. And this little video, it's a 2-minute video, tells how they use this stages of change. They're relentless in their data collection, but they're able to use data to actually show and tell their funders their story in these stages of change. They've been incredibly successful in using that to scale their programs, also even to get into social impact bonds, which has actually further allowed them to grow their programs and the impact they have. So there's a great example of using video to share a story. Another example is just a snippet through social media of one of the results areas. So for this not-for-profit, it was 86% of teen parents in our home mentoring programs remained in or entered school or employment. A quick, short, impactful statement that can drive social media engagement. And of course, another one is, of course, using this information to flow through annual reports. Again, being able to report on not only the counts in terms of the people served, but also what the results have been. So we will share with you through those little examples. So that brings us to the end of the session. One thing I did want to mention is that as a result of this little journey, they're starting with reading that pro bono article back in February and talking to Joe and others, we're actually in the process of finalising a white paper. Our intent of the white paper is to actually demystify this process and actually really, again, giving some tools to just get started. So Joe and I hope that this presentation has helped with that, and we look forward to sharing that white paper with people who are interested. So with that, I'll hand back to Tina.
Great. Thanks, Greg. Thanks, Joe. If anybody has any questions, please feel free to put it into the questions panel on your webinar panel. So we do have a question here. As impact is a longer term measurable, what are standard timeframes for impact measurement?
Joe, do you want to take that?
Yeah, sure. Thanks. Impact can be, well, generally does take longitudinal data. So generally we're looking at probably at least 3 years, but it does depend, of course, on the type of program that you're running. So if you're working with infants and then you want to look at the longer term impact to those infants' lives when they're hitting adolescence or whatnot, that's a long program. So it really does depend on the project that you're talking about. The other thing is too that there can be impact in a short-term time frame, and an example of that is, developing a new model of health service delivery that has instant impact in terms of systemic change, different referral pathways, different people that are working together. It can change a whole model of service delivery, and so that can be demonstrated possibly in 12 months. So it's entirely dependent on the actual program in terms of the time frame. Do you have anything to add to that, Greg?
Yeah, a couple of specific examples. So one of the customers, and we're going to share this as part of the white paper, is Hippie Australia. So they support parents of preschool age children, so 4 years old to 6 years old. So it's the year before and the first year of school, particularly in disadvantaged communities. So they are a few months in. About 6 months in their data collection journey, discovered that there was a certain cohort of parents who had stopped reading at a certain point. So they're able to look at that and use that information to go back, do some more work with those parents and discover, you know, what it was, what were the roadblocks, and actually they're able to change some things around their program to actually improve that. Again, another example is the Brotherhood in vocational pathways. They discovered that, you know, in the data showed differently to what they'd actually thought, in that after about, I think it was about 3 months, there was a certain drop-off rate in people actually leaving their employment opportunities that have been created through the program. So again, you know, they use it as a again, what I said before, a spotlight rather than a sledgehammer. They really used it to actually re-look at the programs and actually make some changes, and actually, so it did actually make a difference in, you know, that 3 to 6 month time frame. There's other customers, I guess, you know, who also use the data collection to, you know, if they're doing community engagement or whatever, starting to understand what are the systemic issues that are creating a roadblock, or, you know, what are we hearing in our communities. So that obviously is going to take time, but at least it's gathering the information to actually start to think about other things we can do to heighten our impact. So I guess that's a couple of thoughts.
Thank you. The next question is, can you give a sample or template for the M&E worksheet?
I'm sorry, I'm not sure I understand the question. Greg?
Yeah, the M&E worksheet. I'm just maybe Tina get some clarification.
Okay, so David, if you could please clarify what you mean by the M&E worksheet, so that Greg and Joe can confirm whether or not they can supply that to you. Just give him a second to see if there's anything he can clarify.
Yep.
Okay. If anyone has any other questions they wanted to ask, you just need to type it into the questions box on your webinar panel. I can see a few people have raised their hands but haven't put anything into the questions box.
Yeah, sorry about that for David, but I'm not quite sure what he means by M&E worksheet. But if he can provide some further information, happy to follow up.
Yep. Well, we haven't received anything else from David, and there are no other questions, but that's fine. I can. Here we go. For example, if you have indicators or questions for M&E for a project.
I'm still not 100% sure. I'm wondering if the question is relating to the sample questions that we put up through the presentation, and that the slides will be available to participants post this webinar, I should say. So the sample questions, everything that you've seen today is going to be available to you to reference back to when you are developing your key evaluation questions.
Okay, so David, if there was anything additional you wanted to add to your question, please feel free to put that in. There's another question here from Heather. Is there a standard percentage of funding application that should be budgeted for evaluation?
No, there's not a standard percentage. It really depends on different funders' guidelines. So you need to always clarify with your funders directly what costs are permissible. So some will and some won't fund overhead and admin, whether they include evaluation as an overhead or not. All of those questions you should have, ask in a direct conversation with them. And we would always advocate that you would always attempt to speak to your funding partner before proceeding with an application. At the end of the day, what you've got to be sure to do, and I'm actually delivering another webinar on this very topic next week with Connecting Up on budgeting, and it is really important to get true, accurate costs of your evaluation, because it's no good, you know, putting a cost in and then not being able to deliver in this way that you said you were going to.
Thanks, Joe. I'll send a link out to the registration for the webinar that Joe will be presenting next week to everyone as well. So the next question is, how do you suggest collecting data from clients, i.e. surveys, assessments, when there's a reluctance to complete these survey data collection methods?
Yeah, I guess there's a number of there's a lot to that question. I guess from our point of view, it's actually creating from a technology perspective. The first point might be that, if we're a caseware frontline worker and we've got an iPad, we're able to easily collect that information in sitting down with someone. There is also tools through the software allow, in intake. So if someone is, attending a community engagement event, they can register online or actually just signing up for the program. And actually we can, through that intake portal, capture certain information. Also, increasingly we'll see the ability to send direct messages. So using email and SMS to send a link to a survey. And that's all mobile responsive. So again, making it easy to actually send it to someone. They're on their smartphone, and it provides a link and they can easily take that survey. Down to also a client portal. So for some cohorts, the ability to actually provide a portal for clients to log into, to take and to actually, do maybe satisfaction surveys or see their own, reports of progress over time. So I guess there's various technology answers to support that. But maybe Joe, any other comments from you?
Incentives, if there's any kind of incentive that you can offer, so that if you complete this survey, there might be an additional service that they receive or something. Focus groups are a great way. So invite people to a focus group. There might be some food or something provided and people are able to participate in a less formal manner. But again, the structure of the questions that are asked through those groups can create really good discussion and you can get really rich qualitative feedback through that. And it's also a way of connecting the cohort, which may or may not be relevant. So yeah, I think I don't have anything else to add to what you mentioned there, Greg.
Fantastic. There was another question, where do you sit on the use of incentives for survey completion? But you just answered that, Joe, so thank you. So that's all for questions for now. Was there anything that you wanted to add, Greg and Joe, before we finish off for the webinar?
No, just from my perspective, thank you to everyone for for the opportunity to present. And yeah, look, if you've got any questions, I guess Joe and I both love talking about this topic. And also, the one thing I would leave people with is there is a community of practice of organisations who are doing this. It's not always easy work, but it's really rewarding work. And our community of practice loves sharing their stories. So, reach out to us. We're happy to share.
Yeah, I would echo those sentiments, absolutely. You've got Greg and my contact details there. So if we invite people to contact us, happy to have a discussion about where to get started and what you need to do that. So thanks again for listening in today.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Greg and Joe, for presenting today. And thank you everyone for joining us. I hope you've all learnt a lot from the presentation and that your questions have been answered. If you do have any other questions that come to mind later on or any feedback about this webinar, please send that through to events@connectingup.org and we will answer those questions offline. You can also contact Greg and Joe directly via the information on your screen. Don't forget that the recording will be available on our website very shortly and a link will be sent to you, so keep an eye out on your inbox. Again, thank you for being with us. Enjoy the rest of your day and we look forward to seeing you all next time. Thanks, Greg. Thanks, Joe.
Thanks, Tina.
Thanks, Tina.